Today we're going to talk about how Trump's efforts to overturn the election results in the courts are going, Rudy Giuliani's big case in Pennsylvania, a Trump lawsuit too insane for even Tucker Carlson, and what happened when Trump summoned Michigan lawmakers to the White House to intimidate them into not certifying the results for Joe Biden. I also interview House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, where we talk about whether Trump can face legal consequences for trying to undermine the election results. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. Okay, let's start out with a caveat. You have nothing to worry about. The states are continuing to certify the election results, and Joe Biden will take office on January 20th, 2021. But with that said, that's not for lack of trying on Trump's part. So let's talk about those efforts. First, the lawsuits by his campaign and his allies, which objectively have been an unmitigated disaster. As of this recording, these pro-Trump legal teams are 2 for 34 in court. 2 for 34. They've lost cases claiming that their observers didn't have access to ballot counting, only to have the Republican lawyers admit that they did have access. They've lost cases claiming that votes were cast illegally despite having no proof. Cases about so-called Sharpiegate, where they claimed poll workers were handing Trump supporters black markers that counting machines wouldn't pick up, which was immediately debunked. They brought a bunch of Trump voters to court who complained that their votes weren't being counted, and when they were under oath and asked by the judge if they had any reason to believe that their votes weren't counted, all of them said no. There was a case where they brought a boatload of affidavits from voters decrying fraud, only the Republican lawyer himself admitted to the judge that a number of the affidavits were spam. Here's a fun one. As part of a larger case/conspiracy theory that Dominion voting systems was leading to widespread fraud, Republicans used as proof the notion that more votes were cast than the number of eligible voters in certain counties and towns in Michigan. Only the places listed weren't towns and counties in Michigan, they were in Minnesota. The lawyers had confused Michigan's abbreviation MI and Minnesota's abbreviation MN. So I guess this is the part where we applaud them for only hiring the best people, right? And here's my favorite. Rudy Giuliani's big case where he tried to get all mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania thrown out because of mass fraud. The first time he'd make a federal court appearance in 28 years. Yeah. On Saturday, the judge, who is a member of the Federalist Society, so not exactly Ruth Bader Ginsburg, delivered a ruling dismissing Giuliani's suit with prejudice, meaning it can't be refiled, and wrote, "Plaintiffs ask this court to disenfranchise almost 7 million voters. One might expect that when seeking such a startling outcome, a plaintiff would come formidably armed with compelling legal arguments and factual proof of rampant corruption. That has not happened. Instead, this court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations unpled in the operative complaint and unsupported by evidence. In the United States of America, this cannot justify the disenfranchisement of a single voter, let alone all the voters of its 6th most populated state. Our people, laws, and institutions demand more." The word floating around to describe this is a shellacking. Who'd have guessed that a case that was pumped up at a press conference in a landscaping parking lot between the sex shop and the crematorium would end so unceremoniously? And now, with all of these suits having failed, we've got another crackpot lawyer, Sidney Powell, showing up at her own press conferences claiming that Cuba, China, and Venezuela have all conspired to steal the election from Trump. She literally invokes Hugo Chavez, the former president of Venezuela who died in 2013.
Here and uncovering more by the day is the massive influence of communist money through Venezuela, Cuba, and likely China in the interference with our elections here in the United States. The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, and the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election after one constitutional referendum came out the way he did not want it to come out. We have one very strong witness who has explained how it all works. His affidavit is attached to the pleadings of Lynn Wood in the lawsuit he filed in Georgia. It is a stunning, detailed affidavit because he was with Hugo Chavez while he was being briefed on how it worked.
That is what they've resorted to. It's now not only dead voters and illegal voters and Sharpies. Cuba and China and Venezuela are in on it too. It is so insane that Tucker Carlson is rejecting it. Tucker Carlson.
What Powell was describing would amount to the single greatest crime in American history. Millions of votes stolen in a day. Democracy destroyed. The end of our centuries-old system of self-government. Not a small thing. Now, to be perfectly clear, we did not dismiss any of it. We don't dismiss anything anymore, particularly when it's related to technology. We've talked to too many Silicon Valley whistleblowers. We've seen too much. After 4 years, this may be the single most open-minded show on television. We literally do UFO segments. So that's a long way of saying we took Sidney Powell seriously. We had no intention of fighting with her. We've always respected her work. We simply wanted to see the details. How could you not want to see them? So we invited Sidney Powell on the show. We would have given her the whole hour. We would have given her the entire week, actually, and listened quietly the whole time at rapt attention. That's a big story. But she never sent us any evidence, despite a lot of requests, polite requests, not a page. When we kept pressing, she got angry and told us to stop contacting her. When we checked with others around the Trump campaign, people in positions of authority, they told us Powell has never given them any evidence either, nor did she provide any today at the press conference. Powell did say that electronic voting is dangerous, and she's right. We're with her there. But she never demonstrated that a single actual vote was moved illegitimately by software from one candidate to another. Not one. So why are we telling you this? We're telling you this because it's true.
Like, what does it say when you've lost Tucker Carlson? Tucker Carlson may be the single worst human on television. He's an avowed racist and misogynist and, yeah, a conspiracy theorist who thinks that this conspiracy theory is too insane even for him to co-sign onto. And aside from all of this, even the wins were completely inconsequential. They won 2 cases in total. One case allowed observers to get a few feet closer. The other allowed a cure deadline to be changed from 9 days to 6 days. That's it. And so clearly, if Trump and his allies' plan was to actually try and win this thing in the courts, it's not happening. But with that said, this isn't necessarily about winning in the courts. And that's where I think that their strategy is a little more insidious than just a bunch of embarrassing failed litigation. Because just by virtue of presenting these lawsuits, it buoys their disinformation campaign. I don't necessarily think this is about winning in the courts of law. I think it's about winning in the court of public opinion, right? Because once he's got enough public pressure mounted and his supporters are thoroughly brainwashed into thinking that the non-existent fraud does in fact exist, the theory is that he can use that to pressure Republican officials in key states to delay certification. And if you think that sounds way too blatantly authoritarian even for Trump, consider the fact that he's already doing it. Trump summoned Michigan's Speaker of the State House and leader of the state Senate to the White House this past week in an effort to get them not to certify the results of the election that he lost, having relied on the exact same public pressure campaign that he himself created. And they accepted the meeting. So we all sat around watching as the most powerful man in the world used the biggest bully pulpit in the world to bring in a couple of members of the state legislature in Michigan to the White House, where he would demand that they override the will of the voters and refuse to certify the results of the election. It is so incredibly undemocratic. It's anti-democratic. It's despotic. And it happened in broad daylight. And so we sat here holding our breath, and then finally they left that meeting and released a statement that said, "We used our time in the White House to deliver a letter to President Trump making clear our support for additional funds to help Michigan in the fight against COVID-19. They went on to write, "We have not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan, and as legislative leaders, we will follow the law and follow the normal process regarding Michigan's electors, just as we've said throughout this election." And then they added this part, quote, "Michigan's certification process should be a deliberative process free from threats and intimidation." They had to say that they shouldn't be intimidated during the certification process because the President of the United States couldn't stop trying to literally do exactly that. I should say, too, that by saying what they said, these 2 Michigan lawmakers managed to do what most of the National Republican Party still hasn't had the backbone to do. And look, we're not out of the woods yet, and anyone can say one thing and do another, but credit where it's due, that statement is exactly what should have been released. And meanwhile, we've got 2 Republican senators who've spoken out against Trump, maybe 3, and they're supposed to be the party of patriots, the constitutionalists who aren't willing to respect the peaceful transfer of power. If you ever needed proof that the GOP stands for literally nothing beyond their own grip on power, That every platitude they've spouted about respecting the rule of law and our founding fathers, that it was all meaningless? Look no further than what we're seeing right now. And for what? To coddle the ego of a failed one-term president who's too insecure to admit that he lost? That's what they're willing to undermine the longest standing democracy in the world for? Seriously, the US is the oldest democracy in the world, and basically half of our nationally elected politicians would sacrifice that because Donald Trump is butthurt. And so that brings me to this last point, which is that we don't get to stop paying attention once Joe Biden takes office. We're not going to be able to go back to our regular lives and ignore politics and just never look at the news again. This isn't solved. It's better for sure, but while Trump's gone, he clearly has influence in the party that even as a losing candidate, these clowns in the GOP are still afraid of even just acknowledging that he lost. And B, those very people are all still in office. The Jim Jordans and Ted Cruz's and Matt Gaetz's, they're all still there. Trump was the embodiment of the worst things about the Republican Party, but those issues didn't start with him, and they won't end with him. And if anything, all they've done is normalized anti-democratic behavior within that party. So for the sake of this country, for the sake of every single issue that's important to you, whether it's climate change or healthcare or women's reproductive rights or immigration or a livable wage, your job is to stay informed, because these last 4 years, these last 4 days are a reminder of exactly what can happen if we don't. To listen to my interview with the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, where we discuss whether Trump can be held accountable for his efforts to undermine the results of the election, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. That's it for this week. Happy Thanksgiving.